Once upon a time, there were two siblings, Tim and Sandra, who had the world at their feet. Their parents, loving and kind, filled their small house with laughter and warmth. But all of that changed in an instant. One fateful night, a car accident stole their parents from them, leaving them shattered and alone in the world. They were only children, too young to understand why the world had suddenly turned cold and dark. Taken to an orphanage, Tim and Sandra found themselves in a world that felt so foreign, so unwelcoming. The walls of the orphanage seemed to close in around them, and the faces of the other children were full of stories of sorrow, all too similar to their own. But even there, Tim and Sandra were inseparable. They held on to each other like lifelines, clinging to the remnants of the love they had once known. One day after Tim turned 18, he left the orphanage convinced that he could carve out a future for himself. He promised Sandra he would return, that they would rebuild their lives together. But life had other plans. Tim threw himself into work, throwing himself into the chase for wealth and recognition. Years passed, and with every success, his focus grew narrower, his world smaller, until he lost sight of the one person who had meant the most to him. Sandra faded into the background of his mind. For decades, they lived in separate worlds. Tim climbed the corporate ladder, amassing wealth and success, but none of it brought him joy. He had everything he thought he wanted, but he had lost the only person who truly mattered. Sandra, now middle-aged, lived a quiet life, always looking at the world through a veil of sadness, wishing she could reconnect with the brother who had vanished from her life. Then one day, by pure coincidence, their paths crossed again. Tim had returned to the small town where he and Sandra had once lived, to visit the orphanage that had been their home. There in the quiet halls, he heard a voice that stopped him in his tracks. "Sandra," he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. She turned to face him, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, neither of them could speak, the weight of lost years hanging heavy between them. The years of regret, pain, and silence spilled out between them. They talked for hours, their words heavy with everything they had both suffered. But the pain wasn't the only thing that surfaced. There was love too. From that moment on, they decided to make up for the lost years. They didn't dwell on the past. Instead, they chose to create a future. Together, they set off on an adventure, traveling the world. They explored places they had only dreamed of: Paris, Tokyo, the beaches of Bali, the mountains of Switzerland. They took walks along cobbled streets. They learned that life, even when it feels like it's over, can still be full of surprises. They learned that it's never too late to make up for lost time, to rebuild what was broken, to start anew. In their golden years, with the world at their feet, Tim and Sandra lived their best life together. Every day was a gift, every moment a reminder that love, no matter how far it is lost, can always be found again.